integrity and influence others if his life isn't driven by doctrine. Explain what you mean by that.
Right. Integrity is connected to principles. You know, if you have integrity, you live what you say. The word integrity comes from a mathematical term, which means one. And if you have integrity, you're one. You're not a duplicitous person. You're not divided. You're not inconsistent. You're not contradictory. You don't say one thing one time and something else another time. You don't speak out of both sides of your mouth. And if you have that kind of integrity, that kind of oneness, it has to be connected to something that is fixed, something that is the standard, the immovable, unshakable, inviolable pillar that you're anchored to. And of course, that means that there have to be convictions based upon truth. It's safe to say this: no one can manifest real integrity who doesn't have unwavering convictions about what is true. For any spiritual leader, our integrity then is connected to the revelation of God, to the Bible. We come to know the Bible, to understand the Bible, to believe the Bible, to hold convictions about what it teaches, doctrinal, propositional convictions, and then those anchor our lives and define our integrity. Integrity matters. People of integrity rise above the hoi polloi. They honor God, and they honor one another. I've done a message on this called Why Integrity Matters. It's a CD available, and we will send it to anyone who asks free of charge. That's right, no cost. Contact our ministry. Ask for the free CD on why integrity matters and how it's connected to truth and conviction. We'd love to send it to you. I know it'll bless you and others you share it with.
Integrity is crucial not just for pastors, elders, and leaders, but for every Christian. It's vital to maintain a testimony that honors the Lord. And with that in mind, we want you to get your free copy of this CD, Why Integrity Matters. Mention the title when you contact us here today. Send an email request to letters@gty.org or through the regular mail, write to Grace to You, Post Office Box 4000, Panorama City, California, 91412. You can also let us know you'd like a free copy of the CD, Why Integrity Matters, when you visit online at gty.org or call toll-free 1-800-55-GRACE. That number is easy to remember, 800-55-GRACE. Now, as you get in touch, remember that for a limited time, nearly all of our resources are on sale, 25% off the regular price. That includes our flagship resource, the Macarthur Study Bible, as well as the Macarthur Daily Bible and the Macarthur New Testament Commentary Series. Great opportunities right now during the sales to get these tools and help you build a habit of studying God's Word. So, to order the Study Bible, the Daily Bible, or Topical Bible, or any of our resources we have on sale, call toll-free 800-55-GRACE or shop online at gty.org. For John MacArthur and the staff, I'm Carl Miller, thanking you for making the broadcast a part of your Tuesday. Do join us again tomorrow for this half hour of Unleashing God's Truth, one verse at a time, here on Grace to You. Soon, Americans will elect a president. How do you vote with biblical values? Find out as we interrupt our regular programming for a message on who is God's candidate. That's tomorrow on the next Grace to You.
one time, and that'll probably be the last time. But how many of you know that when the temperature rises, your true colors start to show? It starts getting a little weird, right? Right? Like the temperature impacts your tolerance. And Jonah was not tolerating anything at all. So then the Lord provides a plant for shade. Okay, now if you've read chapter 4, you know where I'm going with this, okay? He provides a plant for shade. And Jonah's like, okay, yeah, I was angry, I was mad, now I'm not. Thank you for the shade, I'm a little more comfortable, I appreciate it. The next night, the Lord provides a worm to eat the plant. Jesus just be having fun up there. He just be like, let's see what he's gonna do. And all of a sudden, Jonah is angry again, right? In a vicious cycle, one after the other, right? Like it's kind of like what we experience. We experience a promotion, but then we realize we got to work twice as much, right? Well, I got the shade. Yeah, I'm ready. Let's go party. Monday, what? You want me to 60, 70 hours this week? Are you kidding me? Right? Like he provides an answer for you, but then that just gets you more questions that you have for him. And so you're like, oh, wait, I would have been happy about that, but now I'm upset because now I have more questions than I had beforehand, right? He provides a significant other for you. Come on, somebody, all the single people say, hey, that's me tonight. He provides a significant other, but now you have to change. Right? Now your accountability is, well, maybe I should change because this is not going to work. This is something I had to do. I remember when I got married with my wife and I was like, oh my goodness, I just struck the jackpot, okay? This is amazing. Oh my goodness. 2 months in, oh, I am completely jacked up. I am messed up. Oh, so you're not just gonna fit into my schedule? We have to create a new one. Oh, okay. I can't just think about me. I gotta think about us. Oh, okay. This is starting to make a lot of sense. And then we get into the last 2 verses of Jonah 4. And it says, but the Lord said that you have been concerned about this plant, though you did not tend it or make it grow. It sprang up overnight and died overnight. And should I not have concern for the great city of Nineveh, in which there are more than 120,000 people who cannot tell their right hand from their left? A lot of times we tend to be concerned with the things that weren't meant for our concern. In this book of Jonah, in these 4 chapters, God was using everything in his power to get Jonah back to the assignment that he had given him from the very beginning. God was pushing Jonah back into his will, one opportunity at a time. And the reality is that God was trying to make disobedience to the assignment as uncomfortable as possible. And then we wonder why. Oh my goodness. Why is this happening to me? Y'all think I'm exaggerating, but this is what we do. No one loves me. No one texted me on my birthday. That happened to me once. I'm not here to tell you that opportunities are bad. That's not the sermon here. I'm not here to say that opportunities are bad, but disobedience is. Disobedience is, and we tend to overlook the assignment and overpay for an opportunity. Do we not? I found myself doing this. And wait, God told me to do that when I was 15, and at 19, I now start walking in it. What? Why do we tend to do this? So you know about Jonah and the whale, We know about him running away. We've heard about Jonah and the worm. But when I read through this book, I realized Jonah led one of the biggest revivals in history. Mind you, it was the Ninevites, and 120,000 people were saved and delivered because of this assignment. This was the assignment from God. This was the plan all along for Jonah. The reality is that we glorify opportunities and flee from assignments. We have got to be a generation that when God says to do something, yes, sir, how can I make it easier? What can I do now? We have got to take the assignment and begin to take a step forward. But it's nice to preach. It's really hard to live out. Because we begin to think like we begin to wrap opportunity in thinking that is the assignment. Like, well, I don't like JJ gets up. Hey guys, we should probably, church is coming back in person. It's time to serve. Let me get out of this building. Let me get home and no one's gonna ask me about it. I mean, it's as simple as that. Fleeing from something that could be the very thing that leads you to the ultimate cause. What's interesting is that, again, I'm not saying opportunities are bad, but I am saying this, is that we do serve a God that even when we do flee from the assignment, God gives us opportunity after opportunity after opportunity to lead us back to the very thing that God asked us to do at the beginning. This is why we do what we do here at Elevation Church. For 15 years now. This is why we serve. This is why we are opening up campuses. This is why in the middle of the pandemic, we were able to, continue to push things forward online with eFam. This is why we do kids ministry. This is why we do e-groups ministry. And to be honest, this is why we do youth ministry. This is it. It's not to fill a seat. You come only once a month anyways. It's not that. Sorry, I'm getting loose. I'm sorry.
Ordinary people. And we must not deify the people that God uses to the point that we start to think that they're angels or something like that. They're still human. And the Bible said we see through a glass darkly. We don't see everything. We don't know everything. We haven't mastered everything. What is interesting to me, and then I'm going to get into my text in just a minute, but what's interesting to me is they are much like the Old Testament church coming out of Egypt. And coming out of Egypt through the wilderness toward the promised land, they come out of Egypt almost immediately, miraculously, by the power of God. But they spend 40 years trying to get Egypt out of them. So the disciples have come from this rich Judaistic tradition, but they spend the next almost 100 years trying to separate the infusion of where they came from, because all of us have a perspective that tints the lens through which we see God based on the perspective that we came from. And it is a process of maturing and maturation that ultimately pulls back that skin and brings us to a point that we are circumcised in our hearts, and we begin to see God more clearly without the contamination of where we came from and the biases and the prejudices. So this is the tenor of what's going on. When I start to talk about the lens through which they see faith, there's a couple of things that I want to interject here that I think is important for you to consider. First of all, there is the blood lineage that flows through the Hebrew people, later called the Jews. that goes all the way back to Abraham. Abraham is the father of the faith, but he's also the father of the faith. 3 different religions claim him to be the patriarch of their faith: Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. So it all goes back to Abraham. It all starts with Abraham from a lineage perspective. When it comes to a nation, a nationality of people, it starts at Mount Sinai, and I'm going to deal with that later in a minute. But so far as bloodline is concerned, I want to just deviate for a minute and show you the mystery that God interjects here that gives us a sneak preview of what God has in store and what God is going to do. And I think there's some things here that are going to be important for you to understand. First is who was Abraham? Okay. If you read in Genesis 11, 27 through 30, it says this, and this is a NIV version. This is the account of Terah's family line. Terah became the father of Abraham. So Terah is Abraham's father. So it starts not talking about Abraham, but talking about his father Terah. Terah became the father of Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Remember now that Abram does not become Abraham until later in the story. Same person, God just modifies his name to make him the father of many nations. And Haran became the father of Lot. So Haran is Abraham's brother, okay? And so Lot is his nephew. While his father Terah was still alive, Haran died in Ur of the Chaldeans, in the land of his birth. That's what I want you to understand, that Abraham comes out of Chaldea, okay? He died in Ur, which is modern-day Mesopotamia, which was the old country Mesopotamia, and he died in Ur of the Chaldeans in the land of his birth. We don't get to take Abraham and make him whatever nationality we want him to be if we are true to Scripture. The Bible takes away all ambiguity. We don't have to guess. We don't have to research. It is quite clear. Abraham comes out of Chaldea, and in particular, Ur, in the land of his birth. Okay? Let's go deeper. Abraham and Nahor both married. The name of Abraham's wife was Sarai, later called Sarah, and the name of Nahor's wife was Milcah. She was the daughter of Haran, the father of both Milcah and Iscah. Now Sarai was childless because she was not able to conceive. It's important that we understand that. It's important that we understand where Abraham began, because today there's a lot of debate about who is really Israelite and who is really Jew. Well, we got to go back to bloodline. If we go back to bloodline, we go back to Abraham. If we go back to Abraham, we don't get to make him European or African or Asian or whatever we want him to be, depending on how we feel about it. No. The Bible is quite clear. He comes out of the Middle East. He comes out of Mesopotamia. He comes out of Ur. His people had migrated into Mesopotamia. They did not migrate out of Africa. They are a particular sect of people that came out of the Middle East, okay? And so it is quite clear here that he is Semitic. Okay, so when we begin to talk about Abraham, we must talk about him as the father. That's the bloodline, okay? The bloodline. Now, I want you to be clear about this. So God says in Genesis chapter 12, verse 1, and I'm going to read this out of the King James Version, and it may be helpful. Now the Lord had said unto Abram, get thee out of thy country. Get thee out of thy country. And what is there? The country is Mesopotamia. And from thy kindred, and from thy father's house, unto a land that I will show thee. And I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. And I will bless them that bless thee, and curse them that curseth thee. And in thee shall all families of the earth be blessed. In thee shall all families of the earth be blessed. So there's a couple of things here that I want you to see. Let me read a little bit more. I'm getting ahead of myself. And Abram departed as the Lord had spoken unto him, and Lot went with him. And Abram was 75 years old when he departed out of Haran. There's a couple of things that I want you to see. First of all, it was always God's plan that all families of the earth be blessed through Abram. Not just his family, but all families of the earth would be blessed through him. And in order to secure that, from a biblical perspective, there's really only two nationalities, I won't use that word, nationalities, two groups of people that really matter, covenant and non-covenant. Circumcised, later called circumcised, because Abram enters into covenant with God through circumcision, and all of his descendants continued that. It was a sign of the covenant. It's not the circumcision that matters. That's the sign of the covenant. The covenant is with Abraham. So those are covenant people. Either you have a covenant with God or you don't. It's not about your age. It's not about whether you're tall or thin or black or white or brown or anything like that. You either have a covenant with God or you don't. And the covenant in the Old Testament was expressed through circumcision. This is important because when we get to Galatians, one of the things that they're fighting about in the New Testament church is now that we are taking in these Gentiles, should we require that they be circumcised?
Learn and we'll get paid. That's Really No Really with Jason Alexander and Peter Tilden on the iHeartRadio app, on Apple Podcasts, or where you get your podcasts.
And anybody who uses the word pining, let me know, because I don't think anybody's used that since the Middle Ages.
Very common word.
Good news like this sink in. I submit it's because of our old friend, the behavioral immune system. Many people's mental set for the pandemic was formed early on when the behavioral immune system was on fire, and they were schooled by a master narrative that promised there would be only one type of person who would not pose a danger: the vaccinated person. Stuck in that mindset, when confronted by unvaccinated people, about half of whom are immune, they respond with BIS-generated fear, hostility, and loathing. Some take it further and seem almost addicted to being scared, or remain caught in a kind of post-traumatic lockdown nostalgia, demanding that all the previous protections go on indefinitely, never factoring in the costs and triggering ever more distrust. Their minds are hijacked by a primal, archaic, cognitively rigid brain circuit and will not rest until every last person is vaccinated. To some, it started to seem like this is the mindset not only of a certain cohort of their fellow citizens, but of the government itself. Moreover, because COVID vaccine hesitancy is based in significant part on distrust of the government and related institutions, it has to be understood not only in terms of vaccines, but in the context of the pandemic more broadly. First and foremost, in other words, of the experience of lockdowns. For many, trust was broken by the lockdowns, which devastated small businesses and their employees, even when they complied with safety rules, such that an estimated 1/3 of these businesses that were open in January of 2020 were closed in April of 2021. Even as we kept open huge corporate box stores where people crowded together. These policies were arguably the biggest assault on the working classes, many of whom protected the rest of us by keeping society going in the worst of the pandemic, in decades. That these policies also enriched the already incredibly wealthy, the combined wealth of the world's 10 richest men, the likes of Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, Bill Gates, and Larry Page, is estimated to have risen by $540 billion in the first 10 months of the pandemic. And that various politicians who instituted lockdowns were regularly caught skirting their own regulations, solidified this distrust. And yet, it is the unvaccinated who many leading officials still portray as recklessly endangering the rest of the country. Quote, "We're going to protect vaccinated workers from unvaccinated co-workers," President Biden has said. The unvaccinated are now presented as the sole source of future variants, prolonging the pain for the rest of us. For those in favor of mandates, the vaccine is the only way out of the crisis. To them, the vaccine hesitant are merely ignorant and defy science. We tried to use a voluntary approach, they believe, but these people are Neanderthal who must now be coerced into treatment or be punished. Among the punishments called for is not just loss of employment, but also of unemployment insurance, health care, access to ICU beds, even the ability to go to grocery stores. It's not trivial to override the core felt sense in a democracy that if anything is one's own, it's one's body. The idea of the state or a doctor performing a medical procedure forcibly on a person or drugging them into compliance without their consent is an abiding, terrifying theme of many science fiction dystopias, and it's a fear that runs very deep in the modern psyche. This fear runs deeper in some people than their fear of the virus or losing their jobs or pensions, as we are seeing. History shows that these are not just fantasies. Past medical and public health abuses really did make use of forced injections of drugs, operations, sterilizations, and even psychiatric abuses in totalitarian and democratic societies both. Moreover, to say to the unvaccinated, but it's in the name of the greater good, is to make the utilitarian argument that we must strive for the most good for the greatest number of people. A version of utilitarianism is often the governing philosophy of public health. But this raises a series of questions. How are we measuring the good? Is it the same for all people? Should it be up to your 89-year-old grandmother, who has little time left, to decide whether to spend the remaining years of her life in total isolation or risk COVID but see her loved ones? And the bigger questions. Can you explain how you are helping the group when, by overriding individual rights, you degrade the group as a whole by weakening each individual within it? Are you aware that the greatest evils in history have also always been done in the name of that abstraction, the greater good? Without first answering such questions, utilitarianism is but a shallow form of arithmetic, one passing itself off as moral philosophy. It is not irrational for people to insist that public discourse seriously engage questions like these, and that any state compulsion related to people's bodies be based on a flawless, airtight argument that is well communicated. That has not happened. What, in rational political and public health terms, is the state's best justification for mandating that people be injected en masse with a medicine? The first justification for mandates is that they get us to herd immunity faster. But, as Stanford epidemiologist Jay Bhattacharya and Arizona State University economist Jonathan Ketchum note, quote, "We have good reason to doubt that if most everyone got vaccinated, we'd achieve herd immunity," close quote. This is because, as we've seen, current vaccines are fading at about 5 months. Even scientists who believe vaccines will help get us to herd immunity are divided on what percentage of the population needs to be vaccinated to get us there. Early in the pandemic, Fauci said we needed as low as 60 to 70% to reach herd immunity, but as time went on, he increased the numbers. In December 2020, when the New York Times noticed Fauci was, quote, quietly shifting the number upward, close quote, he explained he was generating these percentages based on a mix of the science and what he felt the public was ready to hear, admitting, quote, "We really don't know what the real number is," close quote. President Biden recently said we could need 98% of Americans to be vaccinated to reach the goal.
One of the things the Word of God is declaring to all of us right now is that we're more alike than we are different. We're more alike than we are different. There is no temptation that's overtaken you that's not common to everyone. You might say, well, no, in my case. No. There is no in my case. Because the truth of the matter is every single one of us must endure many sufferings must go through many tribulations in order to be saved. It's just how it goes. And therefore, no temptation has overtaken you that is not common to everyone you know. God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted beyond your strength. Again, it's not just, well, didn't you just bear down and grit your teeth and white knuckle this whole thing? It's no. God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond your strength. But with the temptation will also provide the way of escape, that you may be able to endure it. So important. Oh my gosh, so important. Now, St. Paul in this section of, we already jumped to 1 Corinthians. I apologize if you didn't catch that jump. We have 1 Corinthians 9 and 10. One of the things Paul is making a claim to, he's making his claims to the rights of an apostle. And he basically says, when he went to Corinth, he worked as a tent maker. That was his trade, he made tents. And so he didn't ask for any money, didn't ask for any support from anyone, essentially. He just simply worked. And here is Paul, though, saying that, remember, I could have. And remember that it's a real thing that you pay people who give you good service, right? You don't muzzle an ox when it's treading out the grain. That the priests in the temple, they eat of the sacrifices. That, remember, we went through the whole Old Testament. How did the priests, they don't get any land, they have the inheritance, but how do they eat? Well, they eat because they take a portion of what's given in the temple. So what St. Paul is saying is, I can too. I also can demand that since I brought you the gospel, I served you, I can demand that you take care of me. But he says, but I have made no use of any of these rights, and nor am I writing this to secure any such provision. I'm trying to let you know that I love you. I'm trying to let you know that I care about you. I'm trying to let you know that I'm not going to make any demands on you that are excessive, that aren't for your own sake. And this is just so important. But not only does St. Paul have rights, he has responsibilities. And he says, though I'm free from all men, I've made myself a slave to everyone, that I might win more of them. To the Jews, I became like a Jew. To those under the law, like under the law. Those outside the law, like outside the law. I become all things to all men, that I might by all means save at least some. And then he talks about, this is the end of chapter 9, which is one of my favorite. It's one of those I just keep coming back to. Not only because I like the idea that I am or was an athlete at one point, but because it's so true. Here's St. Paul. Do you not know that in a race, all the runners compete, but only one receives the prize? There are no participation trophies in heaven, apparently. So run that you may obtain it. Run that you may win. Every athlete exercises self-control in all things. They do it to receive a perishable wreath, but we an imperishable. Again, think about that. Think about the people that compete in the Olympics, how hard they work, how much they say no to themselves, how much they say no to certain kinds of foods or drink or alcohol or tobacco, whatever those things are, how much they say yes to working long, hard hours, how much they say yes to sleep, how much they say no to going out, all these pieces in order to do what? It says, in order to win a perishable wreath, but we an imperishable. Now, if an Olympic athlete is striving for a gold medal more than I'm striving for heaven, this is convicting. This is why I love this, because it just pierces me to the heart. If an Olympic athlete is striving more for a gold medal that no one is going to remember next month, if they're striving more for that medal harder than I am for heaven, who's the fool here? Say, well, yeah, but all things in moderation. You don't win a gold medal in the Olympics through moderation. You don't. Champions don't practice moderation. They don't. They have a single-minded devotion. They're single-minded in their goal. And yes, there's such a thing as prudence. Yes, there's such a thing as sense. And yes, virtue lies in the middle. But that isn't having moderate virtue. That's having extreme amounts of virtue. So St. Paul says, I do not run aimlessly. I do not box as one beating the air, but I pummel my body and subdue it. Remember, they keep going back to fasting. They keep going back to prayer. This is normal for the apostles. This is normal for disciples in the early church. I pummel my body and subdue it. So people think like, wow, Catholics talk about mortifications. We talk about doing penances, and that's strange. It's not strange. It is not strange at all. I pummel my body and subdue it, lest after preaching to others, I myself should be disqualified. Because yes, heaven is a gift. It is free. God's grace is a gift. It's free. But I can disqualify myself. I can disqualify myself by saying no to God's will at some point. So through fasting and prayer, through relying upon God, through pummeling our body and subduing it, everything for your glory. And go back to this. If someone striving after an Olympic gold medal is working harder, striving for that thing more than I am for heaven, then something is off. And so I've just asked God, please help me. Help me to strive for heaven like a champion strives for the championship. Help me to strive for heaven like a state high school cross-country runner strives for the state high school. Just even to make it to state, they work harder than so many of us do when it comes to our faith. Lord God, please help us to be faithful. Lord God, please help us to be faithful. Help us to strive after you. Help us to strive out of not fear, but out of love for you, out of a desire to always be with you forever. Not simply a desire to not be separated from you, but a desire to be with you. Let that motivate every one of our actions from this day, from this moment until the last moment, until the final day, until the day we step into your presence. God, we ask you this. Please help us. My friends, I am praying for you. Please pray for me. My name is Father Mike. I cannot wait to see you tomorrow. God bless.
I think, we already are that. It's probably just the recognition of that. And part of that path was actually learning to nurture myself, what I would extend to another, I'm a lover. I love to take care of people and light people up. And yet it would feel so natural for me to do that to anybody in my proximity. And yet, did I always take the time to take care of this body and being, and I didn't. Right. I didn't. And I think at this stage through life experience, and also just looking back, I recognize like, oh my gosh, I'm so grateful that this little one came now, because I, stumbled upon through grace the gift of nourishing and mothering my own self.
I think that there's, another thing that you and Tony teach at nearly every program is, when you're on that airplane and there's turbulence, do they say, okay, put your oxygen mask on you first? It's like, even if you're sitting next to an infant. So when you speak about mothering of self, and letting that love come to yourself first, and the importance of that.
Yes.
Whether you do have children for your own, so that you can be your best self for them, or whether you don't have children. There is, even when you in the beginning there, when you mentioned as a sponsor, it reminds me of anyone who is in, whether you're in the program or whether you've had any kind of sobering up of any kind. If you have to leave an old self and give birth to a new identity, then you do have to kind of mother yourself through a transition, and you have to be there for yourself in a way that no one else can but you.
Very true.
And so there's that kind of, essential survival oxygen mask kind of love that, especially if you're at a point like that also has to be celebrated, I think. I agree. All those who have made that transition as well.
And I think, whether it be addiction, but even without addiction, we're all, pulling our pieces back.
That's a beautiful way to say it.
And we all, I think there's life in birth. There's like I can look at a picture of myself a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and think, oh my gosh, like I have compassion for her. I see her and from this perspective, a little more life experience, a little more wisdom. It's like I would choose differently today than I did a year ago. And once again, I think that's the gift that this human experience offers us, is the gift of evolution, the gift to begin again, the gift to be reborn, the gift to renew, to restore. And I think that that's the essential energies of mother energies, is that restoration. And that's the beautiful gift when we're holding the space for another through sponsoring life. I love that you've mentioned AA. My own parents, as I mentioned, they've sponsored individuals their whole life. There was always strangers coming into our home, and whether it be through the holidays or, Christmas dinner or something of that nature, and, the welcoming and the celebration with this beautiful human, and it schooled us as children to accept and to open our heart and our mind. And selfishly, sometimes it was like, no, I just want to be with you know what I mean? Now being an adult woman and being able to live that reality and pay that forward in my own unique way. I don't know. I think that's the universe. I think that's where we all meet. And I really feel like that's the gift, whether you're a parent, whether you're not, whether you're longing to be a mother. In my longing to be a mom, a lot of times in my own suffering, because of what life was offering me, was different than my own, mind of the thought of the way I wanted or perceived it to be. In those moments, I was missing what life was offering me. And yet, from this perspective, I can look back and be like, oh gosh, sweetheart, there was so much that was happening, and so much life to be lived and to be experienced right in front of us. And I think that's the beautiful gift of this journey we're all on.
Mm-hmm. And you've said this a few ways, using words like acceptance and surrender and out of our control.
Mm-hmm.
That thread I've noticed has kind of woven through a few of your responses here today.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something too that I think is so interesting. When I think of, in the past, I suppose, maybe before I became a mom, when I think of a parent, I kind of think of more control.
Mm.
And I realize that honestly, what would make a great loving parent is realizing that at some point you have to surrender control, not to your child, not hand over the reins and let your kid, do anything you want, but also that their path is in many ways, while you have influence, as Tony would say, you have influence, but you don't have control.
No.
And especially, like we have friends, for example, that have lost a child to an opioid addiction.
Mm-hmm.
And so to see a parent, kind of the tragedies of parenthood and motherhood too, when you have that love, immeasurable love, and this is something that you have to at some point surrender and say, for whatever reason, this child's path is out of my control. And even we both have, we know parents that are outstanding people and outstanding parents, and maybe their children are making decisions that they wish they weren't making, and they could be harmful, in fact. And even that part of, that's life. That's not just motherhood or parenthood.
It is.
Wow. There is a level of surrender, whatever word feels true to anyone listening. Maybe surrender. If it's not surrender, it's acceptance. It's acknowledgement that I, little me, do not have as much control as maybe I wish I had. But there's like an evolution that I think that comes, especially in any kind of parenting role of, this is out of my hands.
It's very true.
Let it be. Let go, let God, as my mom would say. And there's something there. It's like, I'm just starting now to understand all these little isms and catchphrases that my mom, I used to make fun of. And now I'm like, man, she was right. She was so right.
Your mom is lovely. I think, we're blessed with amazing parents. My parents as well, like they had two of my siblings, dealt with addiction, opioid addiction, and, watching the pain of that, watching the, the worry, the obsession, the enabling, all the dynamics that happen in the human play. And it's ironic, I thought I knew what surrender was in my 30s. In my 20s, I remember reading books about it. It's like, oh yeah, I surrender all the time. The truth is we do in each breath, we let go and we come back to a greater truth. But wow, I think one of the greatest gifts in AA is, the notion of one day at a time, or their prayer, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. I said that prayer throughout my entire life. And I remember praying it, and I said the words, and I didn't understand the words. And
even, we can document from history, not only in the situation of the people of Israel, but in many other situations, even cannibalism taking place within cities that are being besieged by a ferocious enemy, where you are convinced that if you give in, it's actually going to be worse than what you're even experiencing within the context of the besieged city. These are horrible things. There is no reason to even attempt to explain them away or to give them some spiritual meaning or anything else. These are literal descriptions of things that have happened, and they are terrible things. And there are places in the world where similar things happen this day, on the continent of Africa, for example, where there is war continuously, and in Sudan especially, horrific things happening on a regular basis. We tend to sort of tune all of that out. But this type of evil takes place in this world. And it certainly gives gives the lie to those that would try to tell us that mankind is in of himself just a really good creature. He just needs to be properly educated and given a good job. That's a rather naive understanding of the nature of mankind. And certainly the enemies that God brought against the people of Israel, the Assyrians, were particularly known in history for their ferocious treatment of the people that they would conquer. This is known not only from the biblical accounts, but from external accounts as well. And so these curses are presented to us. And I notice verse 37, for example, you shall become a horror, a proverb, and a taunt among all the people where Yahweh drives you. Those are the people who trusted in Yahweh, but they rebelled against him. Look what happened to them. Instead of being people who were feared because of Yahweh's blessings upon them, now they become a watchword, a byword. And if you've read the book of Lamentations recently, you know exactly how this is fulfilled. And you can hear the cry of the heart of those that experienced these horrific things. But please note how many generations passed by. How many centuries passed by of prophets being sent and restoration being sent, and this constant cycle within the people of Israel before finally the fulfillment of the full extent of these curses was brought forth. It wasn't upon the first generation. It wasn't upon the second. It wasn't upon the third. God was extremely, extremely lenient and patient toward these people, stretching out his toward them. But then you will notice a statement that after the prophetic language is used of probably bringing the Assyrians, Babylonians, the besiegement that takes place, there are some statements that are made that I think we need to focus in upon and maybe understand exactly what is being said. You'll notice beginning around verse 60 or so that the deliverance of Israel from Egypt comes into view as a paradigm or example. And as God had brought them out through bringing disease and pestilence and the plagues upon the nation of Egypt to demonstrate his supremacy over the gods of Egypt, now you have, in essence, a reversal of the birth process of the nation in the punishment of the people. So, in other words, they have become like the Egyptians. The very people that were the example of the world out of which they had been delivered now becomes the example of what they themselves have become, and hence they can hardly claim injustice if God does to them what he did to the Egyptians in freeing them from bondage and slavery. And so they are going back into verse 60, he will bring back on you all the diseases of Egypt of which you were afraid, and they will cling to you. What a fitting thing that in the very memorials, the very many of their observances were meant to remind them. Think about what happened at Passover. Meant to remind them of the great deliverance and the grace, the undeserved grace that had been delivered to them. And now in the reversal of those things, the justice of God upon someone who would rebel in this way. And so we come to a very interesting yet difficult verse in verse 63. And I honestly don't remember ever hearing anyone preaching on this verse. That doesn't mean anything. I mean, I'm sure it's been preached on more than once by many people, but it's not a popular one. It shall come about that as Yahweh delighted over you to prosper you and multiply you, so Yahweh will delight over you to make you perish and destroy you. and you will be torn from the land where you are entering to possess it. Now, a lot of people are very comfortable with the idea of God delighting over his people, prospering his people. Very comfortable with the idea of God's being a God of blessing. But there's a direct correlation here. Just as he delighted over you to prosper you and multiply you, so Yahweh will delight over you to make you perish and destroy you. It's there. What do you do with it? The tendency of modern man is to arrogantly set ourselves up as the arbiter of what we will and will not accept. I know many a person today, popular writers, whose books line the shelves of many Christian bookstores, who will look you straight in the eye if you were even to mention this text, and will say to you, that is not the word of the Lord. That is not divine revelation. That is what someone post-exile thought about God, but I do not feel myself constrained to believe that those words are true. You will find many a person, popular writers today, the entire emergent church movement, as a whole, I think, would embrace what I just said, would say, yeah, that's not the God, the Father of Jesus. That's not the heart of Jesus. Therefore, I reject what this says. Now, aside from the fact that we do not have a scintilla of evidence from the New Testament that Jesus ever approached the text of the Old Testament in that way, I think it demonstrates a fundamental lack of understanding, not only of the seriousness of sin, the holiness of God, but the reality that